Welcome in, Dog Nation. I'm Kaylee Mansell with DawgNation insider Connor Riley, who got a chance to sit in and listen to all of Georgia's coordinators speak earlier today, including offensive coordinator Mike Bobo, who came under a lot of fire last year for the offensive problems that Georgia had. And I think coming into today, he knew that there was going to be a lot of pressure on him and a lot of answers wanted about what happened last year. So how do you feel like Bobo handled that pressure today?
Yeah, I think that this was a Mike Bobo who understood the assignment, to use
Mhm.
a Gen Z catchphrase. He knew there were going to be certain questions, whether it be about the running game, whether it be about Gunner Stockton, specific players there. He knew what he was going, I think, to be asked about. I think he did his best to answer those, but I think, as any Georgia fan will acknowledge, there's some skepticism that exists with Mike Bobo as the offensive coordinator, and they're going to need to see it out there on the field before they believe that while it's one thing to diagnose the issues that this offense faced a year ago, it's another to go out there and fix them. And so I'm very interested to sort of see how Georgia goes about doing that this year.
So it was no secret that UGA got a bad rap last year for slow offensive starts. And let's just say there was no time wasted getting into that. So here's Mike Bobo on last year's slow starts.
You go through it, and a lot of times, a lot of it was execution issues, and then sometimes, to be quite frank, it was a little bit being conservative in those situations. And then the other side of it, the teams we played were pretty good on defense, and stopped us early in games. But that's been a big point of emphasis of ours. But sometimes starting fast, does not necessarily mean, your touchdown, or, touchdown, field goal, touchdown. Sometimes starting fast is, you get a couple first downs and you change the field position. When you go 3 and out to start games, that's something we definitely got to improve on.
Okay, so looking at last year, Georgia finished the season with an average of 4.4 points scored in the first quarter and was shut out in the first quarter in 6 different games. Like he said, a fast start doesn't always guarantee you a win, but considering how many close games Georgia had to play last year, it does make you have to play more conservatively, which is something that he talked about. But this year, that can't be an issue considering how much talent that Georgia now has in that wide receiver room and some of the guys that they brought in from the portal as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but this was literally the first question that Mike Bobo got asked in his press conference. And I think, as you hit on there, Kaylee, you don't need to go out there and score 21 points in the first quarter. And quite frankly, the way a lot of teams play Georgia now, because of the talent advantage that the Bulldogs have, you're going to see teams try and shrink the game. So I do think in some areas, the defense can maybe help out the offense a little bit in terms of getting off to quicker starts and not having to play from behind. You think last year, back to that Notre Dame game, Georgia was poised to go up early in that game, but then Trevor Etienne has a key third down fumble just outside the red zone, and that really changed the complexion of the game there. So I think going into this year, especially with a new full-time starting quarterback, Georgia knows that it has to do more to at least start the game in rhythm and get them in a good flow quickly, even if that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to start seeing scores of 21, 14, 17 in the first quarter of these Georgia games.
So, from an offensive standpoint, it sounds like it's something that they're working on, but I feel like it's got to be really hard in practice to try to replicate what a fast start looks like in a game. What can they specifically be doing during fall camp to make sure that that's something that they are able to do when the season starts?
I think the big thing is just building chemistry and developing a rapport, whether that be Gunner Stockton with his receivers, or figuring out in the run game how they want this team to look. Kirby Smart has been in particular very close to the chest in terms of some of the changes that they've made with the run game this season. I thought Mike Bobo today had some interesting comments about what he wanted the identity of this Georgia team to be and how that stems from the run game there. But I think there's a connective tissue that this team needs that I think we could say, quite frankly, now looking back last year, whether it be because of Carson Beck's leadership and ability or the injuries on the offensive line, there just wasn't that connectedness that we saw in the Georgia offense that was needed to start games quickly last year.
So naturally, with it being Bobo that's speaking, there's going to be a ton of questions about Gunnar Stockton. And one of the big questions this year surrounding Gunnar has been how to use his skill set as a runner while also protecting him as a quarterback. Here's what Mike Bobo had to say about that.
It's one thing to say not to do that, and it's another. And on the flip side, it's hard to practice that because our quarterbacks aren't live in practice situations. So whether we're in a walkthrough or practice, even though he's not getting hit, we're constantly talking about what would you do in this situation. I'm going to get the yards. I'm sliding here. It's third down. I'm going to get the first down, because his makeup and his mentality sometimes is I'm going to go get everything. We're going to have to live through some of that because. He's got the mentality of a guy that's going to go get it, but he's not, 230, 235 pounds. So he's got to protect himself when he does decide to pull the ball down and run the ball. And then, at the same time, there are going to be some instances where we've got, quarterback runs designed for him, but there's got to be a balance, because any play that's called, he could turn it into a quarterback run. So as a play caller, you got to be mindful of that, and it's something we're working through.
I understand why this is a big concern to people, but I actually feel like Georgia could be at more of an advantage here than people think. Like, yes, it's a big adjustment from the quarterbacks that they've had before, but the difference between Gunner now and the Gunnar Stockton that we saw at the Sugar Bowl is how much more time they've had to work with him on issues like this, and just like that repetition of going over things and watching film and what can be avoided. But when you have a quarterback that can run the ball, naturally this question is just going to come up a lot and be a major talking point of the offseason. But I do feel like this is something that they're going to have handled by the time that Marshall comes around.
So I think there's a little bit of a misnomer out there in terms of the way that we talk about Gunner Stockton as a runner. I think a lot of people think, well, maybe not the pure speed aspect, that he's going to be a guy like a Lamar Jackson, a Cam Newton type that's going to use his legs to move the ball in that way. I'm not saying he's like this quarterback at all. I recognize this is unfair praise, but I actually think Gunner Stockton, in terms of the way he uses his legs, is similar to Patrick Mahomes in that he's going to scramble to create yards downfield. We know that his deep passing, I think, is the best attribute that he brings to the table, and that's going to be the way that he best impacts the game. But if he needs to go off and pick up yards on a key third down, he's going to show a willingness to do that. And one of the things that Patrick Mahomes has learned in his time in the NFL is how to balance when to run and in which games he can do that. In other games, to just throw it away and live for another down. I'll be very interested in seeing how Gunner goes about doing that this year. They get 2 really warm-up games before going on the road to Tennessee and then playing Alabama at home after that. And so I'm going to be curious. I don't expect Georgia to run Gunner a ton in those first 2 games, but I could see in bigger games his legs being a much bigger factor of the offense, whether it be used in the quarterback run game specifically or just to create more downfield.
So outside of Gunnar Stockton, there were a lot of offensive players that were brought up today, but one that stood out amongst the rest was Colbie Young, and that's because of how highly Mike Bobo spoke about him. So here's Mike Bobo on Colbie Young.
He is probably the leader in that room. He sets the standard of how to work, and I'm not just talking about whether it's route running or catching balls, it's blocking, it's his effort. And that's become contagious because we've got some talented receivers in that room, and some of them are young, and they need to know what it means, to wear the Georgia uniform, and he represents that every day.
I think that's something even I can admit guilt on here, is not having talked about Colbie Young enough, because you have all these shiny new pieces with Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas, and then you look at that freshman class that's coming in. And so I don't want to say that Colbie Young has gotten lost in the mix, but when you look at the current situation that he's in, he was only supposed to be at Georgia for 1 year. And we all know having that extra year makes such a difference in being immersed into the Georgia culture and the way Georgia practices. So it doesn't surprise me at all to hear these high remarks about Colbie Young just because of that extra time that he's been given. I think that's going to make a huge difference in not only what we see on the field, but even that leadership role that Mike Bobo was talking about.
Yeah, this is a guy who I think over the course of the offseason has been forgotten a little bit, in part because he gets suspended last year after the Auburn game, unable to play for the rest of the season after getting off to a fairly strong start. I know people didn't love his performance in the Alabama game, but this was a guy who looked like to be a trusted target for Carson Beck, and then that just went away. And when you factor in that Robert Thomas was also dismissed, they really didn't have another outside wide receiver that could really do what Young did, and they were sort of pigeonholed into having Dylan Bell in that role. Well, now Colbie Young is back, and he's taken steps forward. I tell you, every time we get a chance to watch Georgia at practice, the receiver that stands out the most physically, it is not Zachariah Branch because of his speed. It is not Noah Thomas because of his height. It is Colbie Young because of the total package that he brings to the table. And so the fact that you have him now in a position where he's not going to be asked to be the number one option on this team. I don't know that there is anyone on this team that is going to straight up be asked to do that. But the fact that he can earn that role potentially and has continued to build off what he showed at times last season, I think is one of the reasons Mike Bobo is very encouraged by what Colbie Young can do, especially in the red zone where his size and his ability to win in tight areas, I think is going to be a very welcome addition to what Gunnar Stockton has to work with.
So if you go to our DawgNation YouTube page, you can watch all of the coordinator press conferences from today. But, I mean, it's very obvious that Mike Bobo's was the one that was the most anticipated. Do you have any final takeaways from what you heard from Bobo?
The last question that Bobo got was regarding his health, and he addressed the erroneous report that Buck Bellew put out this offseason that Bobo is going to be stepping away with health concerns. And I encourage you to watch the entire press conference as well, read the stories we have coming at DawgNation.com. But Bobo acknowledges that he is not necessarily the most beloved member of the Georgia football program. But he's still incredibly excited to be here at the University of Georgia. He's fired up by the challenges that this team presents. And he's looking forward to, I think, correcting a lot of the mistakes that went wrong last year. Some of that on him, some of them not. And he's really energized and excited in a way that I don't know that a lot of people maybe anticipated he would be going into the season, given the pressure that is on him that he readily acknowledges.
So with that, we'll wrap up. Make sure to check out our DawgNation YouTube page for those press conferences, as well as DawgNation.com, especially with the first scrimmage coming up this weekend. And with that, we thank you for joining us.